Welcome to St Mary's Church, Swansea, shining brightly in the heart of the city. On Sunday, the 2nd of June 2002, St Mary's Church was full with a congregation of over 900. The great and the good of the city, the congregations of the Central Swansea Team Ministry, and invited members of all denominations and religions, representatives of the organisations in the city, young and old, uniformed and non-uniformed, and 300 invited guests who were successful in a ballot for tickets, coming together to celebrate the Golden Jubilee of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. It was a unique occasion for the city of Swansea when St Mary's was able to welcome His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales and Prince William and Prince Harry to the service. More about this service later, because this was not the first royal visit to St Mary's. Firstly, we turn the clock back to 1826. The Vicar of Swansea is the Reverend William Hewson. The following report appeared in the Cambrian on Friday the 12th of April.
The ringing of our church bells on Saturday night last announced the welcome but unexpected arrival at Swansea of His Royal Highness Prince William Frederick, the Duke of Gloucester and Edinburgh. Our worthy portreeve, Lewis Thomas Esquire, shortly afterwards had the honour of a personal interview with the illustrious visitor at the Mackworth Arms Inn, and was informed by His Royal Highness that he meant to attend divine service at our parish church on the following day. On Sunday morning, several other gentlemen were admitted to offer their cordial respects to His Royal Highness, amongst whom we noticed the High Sheriff of Glamorganshire, T.E. Thomas Esquire, Sir John Morris, General Ward, Captain E. Morgan of the Artillery, now on duty here, and also the Reverend William Hewson, Vicar of Swansea. At the usual time, the Royal Duke, attended by the portreeve, aldermen, and all the members of the corporation, and a great number of gentlemen of the town and neighbourhood, proceeded to the church, where the crowded and enlightened congregation had their religious and loyal feelings gratified by knowing that a distinguished member of the royal family was with themselves paying adoration with humble piety and earnest devotion at the footstool of the King of Kings.
It was also interesting to note that the Cambrian went on to say,
"We have the pleasure to state that the splendid and valuable picture of the Holy Family, painted by Sassoferrato and left by the will of the late Thomas Bowdler Esquire as an altarpiece for Swansea Church, was on Sunday last exhibited in the place which had been appropriately prepared for its reception, and it will, doubtless, much gratify the surviving relatives and friends of the late pious and exemplary donor of this interesting ornament of the church to learn that the first public exhibition occurred in the presence of a prince of that royal house, to which, through life, he was loyally and steadily attached."
This is only a reconstructed digital copy of the painting. Sadly, the original was destroyed in the Swansea Blitz on the 21st of February 1941. One of the stained glass windows here in the chancel of St Mary's, just above me, features Swansea University. It commemorates its foundation in 1920.
King George V laid the foundation stone of the university on the afternoon of Monday the 19th of July, before the royal party left Swansea to return to London. They had arrived at Swansea Victoria Station at 6 p.m. in the evening from Bilth. They then transferred to the Royal Yacht for the overnight stay. And on Sunday the 18th of July, His Majesty King George V, Her Majesty Queen Mary, and Her Royal Highness the Princess Royal left the Royal Yacht at 10:40 in the morning to inspect members of the United Service Brigade, the veterans, before arriving at St Mary's Church for morning service. They were met by the vicar, the Reverend Harrington Clare Lees. The vicar had written to his churchwardens from the Reform Club in London on the 29th of June, after attending Buckingham Palace to discuss the arrangements for the visit. In it he mentions that they were to meet the king at the gate and lead him into church, with banner and choir, the wardens with staves to walk in front of the king and behind the vicar. He also mentions in the letter, amongst other things, seating arrangements and ticket allocation. A copy of the letter exists in the Church Archive collection held by West Glamorgan Archives Service. It was rescued from the safe of the Blitz Church in February 1941.
A commemorative hymn sheet was produced for the occasion, and on the front it included the names of the vicar and the churchwardens. One of the churchwardens was Mr. E. R. Searle, who happened to be the printer.
4 well-known hymns were chosen for the service, with Crown Him with Many Crowns as the processional hymn, O God, our help in ages past, praise my soul the King of Heaven, and finishing with the hymn Jesu, lover of my soul, with the wonderful Welsh hymn tune by Joseph Parry, Aberystwyth. With over 1,000 voices in church, it would have surely impressed the king and his party. There was no visitors' book in existence at the time, but the royal party did sign the logbook, and this again is held at the archives.
The vicar, Harrington Clare Lees, escorted the royal party from the west door and walked through the churchyard towards the west gate.
It was reported in the local press later that the king and queen had to listen to the banns of no fewer than 14 couples at St Mary's Church, Swansea, when they attended service there. It'll be something for Owen Evans, bachelor, and Morrowen Jones, spinster, both of this parish, to boast about that King George and Queen Mary heard their banns read and raised no objection. The following day, the king laid the foundation stone of Swansea University, and the vicar preceded them in procession, dressed in academic gown.
One of the plaques in today's church commemorates the visit of the Duchess of Gloucester on the 28th of June 1955, which was unveiled during a service held in the shell of the church during the reconstruction after its destruction in 1941.
The Vicar of Swansea on this occasion was Jack Thomas, who was the driving force to get St Mary's rebuilt after the war. The Duchess was led into church by the vicar with his wardens, Mr Turner, the Chief Constable of Swansea Borough Police, the Mayor's wardens, alongside her with the Bishop and Percy Morris, the Mayor of Swansea. She unveiled a plaque at the west wall of the church before taking her place on a covered platform at the front of the church. Thankfully, the platform was covered because as the service started, it began to drizzle, and many in the congregation were caught out. At the end of the service, she was invited to sign a visitor's book, and then made her way back to her car, accompanied by the vicar, the bishop, the mayor, and the church wardens. A visitor's book was used for the first time on this occasion and has been used on each royal visit since then. It was on the 28th of May 1959 that St Mary's was reconsecrated by the Bishop of Swansea and Brecon, Jack Thomas, who had been the Vicar of Swansea between 1945 and 1958.
The service took place in the presence of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, who had seen the damaged church when she visited Swansea with her husband, King George VI, just 4 weeks after the Blitz.
This time the vicar was a young Harry Craven Williams MBE, who had the honour of welcoming the royal visitor to St Mary's. The bells of St Mary's rang out to greet her whilst the television cameras broadcast the service live across the nation. And here, led by the Chief Constable of Swansea Borough Police, Mr. Turner, the mace bearers arrive in the churchyard. Whilst the Bishop speaks to William George, the Mayor of Swansea, the Vicar speaks to Her Majesty, showing her the church. They make their way to the southwest porch. And whilst the Queen Mother makes her way into church, the Bishop takes his place at the west door, waiting for the service to start, where Mr. Stevens will read the petition to consecrate the church.
Once again, the church was filled to capacity.
And the processional hymn, All People That on Earth Do Dwell, and the final hymn, Alleluia, Sing to Jesus, were sung with great gusto by the congregation. Meanwhile, Miss Pamela Williams, daughter of the vicar, waited patiently outside the church for her big moment to arrive when she was to present a bouquet of flowers to the Queen Mother. After the service had finished, the Queen Mother visited the new Holy Trinity Chapel before moving to the attached new vestry hall, where the church wardens and other dignitaries were presented to her. As she left the church, Her Majesty signed the visitor's book and unveiled a stone plaque near the west door to commemorate her visit. As the door opened at the end of the service, Pamela took her place in readiness to present the bouquet of flowers. Unfortunately, the camera missed that moment, and Pamela made a quick exit, not giving the Queen Mother a chance to say thank you. Fortunately, Ronnie Thomas, the South Wales Evening Post photographer, who always seemed to manage to get in the right place at the right time at all events, did so on this occasion too. And so the Queen Mother leaves St. Mary's, accompanied by the Vicar and the Mayor.
The next visitor was Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Gloucester, Brigitte, wife of Richard, Duke of Gloucester, on the 13th of October 1984.
She was attending a service of rededication organised by the Priory for Wales of the Most Venerable Order of the Hospital of St. John of Jerusalem as their Commander-in-Chief in Wales. She was welcomed by the Vicar of Swansea, Canon Don Lewis, and the Bishop of Swansea and Brecon, the Right Reverend Benjamin Vaughan. After signing the visitor's book, she left the church via the west door, passing through a guard of honour of St. John's Ambulance members.
Back now to the royal visit on the 2nd of June 2002, during the Golden Jubilee weekend of Her Majesty the Queen.
The Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh attended a church service at St. George's Chapel, Windsor, while their family attended Thanksgiving services elsewhere in the country. The Princess Royal in Ayr, the Earl and Countess of Wessex in Salisbury, and the Prince of Wales and his sons Prince William and Prince Harry here in St. Mary's in Swansea. They had flown from London into Swansea Airport, where they were met by the Lord Lieutenant of West Glamorgan, Robert Hastie, and the Chief Constable of South Wales, Sir Anthony Burden, and driven to St. Mary's.
The culmination of 8 weeks' hard work by many people had arrived, and as the church filled up to capacity, there was a great air of excitement and anticipation. On the same day, Sweden were playing England in the first group match of the 2002 World Cup in Japan.
Outside of the church, the press began to gather with their ladders and cameras of all shapes and sizes, but were taking an interest in the football. Meanwhile, crowds began to gather early to get a good position and hopefully to get a glimpse of the princes before the service. Back inside the church, the vicar had an important announcement to make.
And can I ask you, before we start, if you could turn off, please, your mobiles. I'm sure that some of you have done so already.
The atmosphere in the church began to grow as the congregation of 900 were all seated and ready for the service to start. All went quiet in the church as the procession of the faith leaders began. Everyone inside the church knew that the princes had arrived when a roar went up from the crowd outside. They were met at the Lich Gate by the Bishop of Swansea and Brecon, the Right Reverend Anthony Pearce, and the Rector of St Mary's, Canon Alan Evans. They made their way to the west door and were presented to Mrs Hasty, Mr Roy Phelps, High Sheriff of West Glamorgan and Mrs Phelps, Mrs June Burtonshaw, Lord Mayor of Swansea, and Mr Burtonshaw, Lord David Ellis Thomas, Presiding Officer of the Welsh Assembly, and Lady Ellis Thomas, Lady Burden, Mr Keith Broadbent, Clerk to the Lieutenancy, and Mrs Broadbent, and Mrs Evelyn Evans, wife of the vicar. The princes entered the church, and the faith leaders and church wardens were presented to them. Meanwhile, those who had been presented to the princes outside the church made their way to their seats at the front of the nave in readiness for the service to start. As they took their seats, the procession started to form at the back of the church. And a fanfare was played on organ and trumpets to signify the beginning of the service. The procession, led by the crucifer and acolytes of St Mary's Church, made its way slowly down the aisle to Hubert Parry's coronation anthem, I Was Glad.
Welcome to St. Benet's Church and welcome to the city of Swansea. 43 years ago, this last week, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, was present here for the reconsecration and reopening of St. Mary's, a sign of the rebirth of the city of Swansea after the ravages of war. Our church has, as it were, grown up during the years of the Queen's reign, sharing in the changes which have been part of our nation's life during those years. Today we meet with the Royal distinguished guests to give thanks to Almighty God for Her Majesty's Golden Jubilee. Coming together from our various communities and congregations in recognition of 50 years of devoted service given to our nation by the Queen, we celebrate and affirm our life together. May our worship this morning be a time of thanksgiving.
During the singing of the hymn of thanksgiving, symbols of coronation, service and community were processed through the church. During the prayers of thanksgiving and confession, the choir and congregation sang a Taizé chant.
Listen to the Gospel of Jesus Christ, according to St. Matthew. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain. And after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the prophets who were before you. This is the gospel of the Lord.
The Gospel was read by Mark Jubali, the Roman Catholic Bishop of Menevia, and the sermon was given by the Right Reverend Anthony Pearce, Bishop of Swansea and Brecon. After adding his welcome to the princes, the bishop spoke of the time the first television set arrived in his village to watch the coronation of Her Majesty the Queen, and reflected how technology had changed over the duration of her reign. And with the help of that technology and a young server, he was able to announce the football score.
England have a 1-0 lead.
The bishop preached an eloquent sermon based on the morning's readings from Micah, the first letter of Peter, and the Gospel of St. Matthew. Unfortunately, we only have a few excerpts of the sermon.
Whilst over the past 50 years, Prime Ministers have come and gone, and not least a few bishops, the Queen has remained a living symbol of continuity, of stability and good order within the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth. As we give thanks today for the Golden Jubilee of Her Majesty the Queen's accession to the throne, and give thanks for the consecration of her life before God, service of nation and Commonwealth, we too are called to dedicate our own lives for the service of God and His children.
The choir then sang the anthem Jubilate, written by His Royal Highness Albert, Prince Consort, in 1850. After an act of dedication and the singing of the national anthems, the royal visitors recessed to the west door of the church during the singing of the hymn All People That on Earth Do Dwell, and signed a visitor's book, sitting underneath a plaque unveiled by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth the Queen Mother at the reconsecration of the church in May 1959, before leaving the church to a wall of noise from the many thousands gathered outside. After talking to the youngsters of the uniformed organisations who had provided the Guard of Honour, the princes then moved on to speak to the crowds of people who had come to greet them. If the princes had recorded the football back at home, hoping not to know the score before they watched it, they were, of course, to be disappointed. It was nearly 45 minutes later before they said their final farewells. The following day, the press reports carried the headlines, "No better way to spend the big day. All smiles for royals. Golden day of vibrant colour. Church packed to the rafters. Bishop on ball for princes." And special service was superb display of pomp and circumstance, with the report adding that the Golden Jubilee service at St Mary's Church on Sunday was choreographed to perfection, with religious leaders, community representatives and the church officials all carrying out their roles without putting a foot wrong.